Welcome to the North. Or welcome to the From the North podcast. Welcome to the North. This is our episode of Games of Thrones. No.
I like that show, though, except for season 7 and 8. That's all I'm going to say about that. Because I get really heated when we talk about Game of Thrones.
Oh, really? I didn't know this.
I get so angry.
I love the cinematography of it.
No fan likes how that show...
No, it's garbage, and I'm so mad a year and a half later.
Okay, so intro.
That was
The whole
intro.
world is too.
From the North, a Masonic podcast where three gentlemen brothers from the northernmost lodge in the state of Utah, in its grand jurisdiction, get together and talk about those three things that I've just forgotten again.
Life, lodge, and
being better man. My name is Gary Roberts. I currently sit as Tyler of Harmony Lodge number 21.
I am Jason Lee, and I sit as Junior Deacon.
My name is AC Ransom. I am Senior Steward, all in the same lodge. And there we go.
We should do an intro where we introduce each other instead of introducing
That'd be
ourselves.
Yeah, that would throw things.
I like
kink
that.
into things.
We'll do that next time. Yeah,
We still don't have a
You
topic.
guys, I have to edit this.
I can edit. I'll it out, but I can edit. Okay. So, anything new Masonically that we've recently discovered? Any new stories we've had? I mean, let's just talk about. You're not the political.
Anything new about anything? What have we? What
So,
have we heard
Logan-
that's not politics.
Logan. I mean, we can talk about politics, but Logan is super smoky right now. And Gary, you gave us a statistic earlier today.
Yeah. So it's the equivalency of what we're running through our lungs is the equivalency of smoking 5 cigarettes in a 24-hour period.
So every 24 hours, you're smoking 5 cigarettes.
We're smoking 5 cigarettes.
That's nothing for some people, though.
That's not. Yeah, but like those people that are already smoking 5, now they're smoking 10.
Yeah, but our valley up here is a bowl, and we sit in what they call in an inversion a lot, even though it's more noticeable in the winter than it is in the summer. And in the winter, we have as good of air quality as LA does.
Ugh.
Yeah, I think
So,
sometimes
super
we're
soupy.
worst air
Yeah.
quality. We're like a day or two,
So it's just
we'll hit that.
the shape of the valley, and there's 120,000 people living in it, and their cars and their cows flatulating and all sorts of stuff.
I don't want to be one of those people that there is like a correlation strongly correlation between like the amount of pollution in an area and like cases of autism, among other things.
Oh,
So like
really?
New Jersey, for example, is like one of the biggest in the country for like cases of autism. But they also have tons of pollution, right? And like Logan Valley actually has like a very high and I probably should have looked up statistics before I started saying this crap. Maybe we don't even put this in there. But like Logan has a very high rate of autism, and we also have horrible pollution, right?
It'd be an interesting thing to study further and see if you could prove a link.
Well, there's definitely a correlation.
That's interesting, though. I mean, because we're the company I work for, we do a lot of the air quality monitoring up here, or help with the air quality, or have the instrumentation that does the air quality measurements. And we've just barely installed, well, I shouldn't say us, it's Utah State University that's done it, but they've installed these PM2.5 monitors up here. And it's interesting to get the data and take a peek and do correlation with data that you would have access to.
It'd be interesting. It'd be super interesting.
Yeah. Geek out right there. I could do that for days. I love looking at data.
I like data, as I previously established.
So what does that have to do with us as Freemasons?
Yeah, I mean...
So I get my cigar every day without even trying.
I would say you could bring that to a Masonic thing as we are discussing getting facts for yourself to learn things.
That's true.
Because somebody could just see a tweet saying, oh, pollution and autism, and just believe it, versus the whole, oh, we should look into that more and learn more about it and find out for ourselves.
Totally, and like, to speak to that, like, I literally just did that. Like, I haven't gone through the data to like actually see that correlation, right? Like, I just know that some of like the people I look up to, not as like heroes, but like as mentors, Like, that's what they've said. And so, like, in my brain, it's like, oh, it must be true then. And, like, I just did the exact same thing.
It is okay to have a trusted source. Sounds like yours
Sure.
are people who are actually... I mean, if you can prove that your source is one that does his research...
But
then you
everyone
can
has
take
a
that
bias. Like, and that's the thing, like...
Even if you don't want bias,
Even
as
if
soon
you
as
don't
you
want
write a
it.
word on a piece of paper, there's bias.
Totally. And, like, for all I know, those people that have said that were just, like, frustrated with the pollution levels of Logan. And, like, they had just heard it once and were just, like, repeating it because they were just frustrated and they were doing an emotional response and it had nothing to do with, like, facts or science. But now that went to me and, like, I take it as a fact. I take it as science. Even though they didn't intend for that to be the case. You know, it could be a million things. And I just realized, like, I'm doing the exact same mother-freaking thing.
Yep.
Believe that.
But it's hard not to. There's this guy who is a brother, and he'll be on podcasts, he'll do live streams sometimes. And I treat a good chunk of what he says as, if not as fact, at least a valid opinion to have. Because he does do his research and stuff. But I should probably go check the research myself.
Totally.
Problem is, and I think that's why a lot of people don't, it
Data is boring.
It takes time.
Yeah.
You have to look up, like, there's always multiple sources for one little thing, like what we've just discussed. And to go check all of that yourself is a lot of work.
Which is funny because we are living in what they call the information age.
Totally.
Yeah, it's never been easier to get data, and we
Than it
use
is now.
less of it.
And we don't use it.
I don't know if we all use less of it, but it seems like less is used.
So I saw this on Facebook the other day. This is a quote from The Demon Haunted World, written by Carl Sagan.
Ooh.
So
Shut up.
this could get a little political in what he has to say there, but it is very apropos to today. He goes on. He says, "I have," and I can't remember when this was written. It's like in the 80s, I think. Don't quote me though. "I have a foreboding of an America in my children or grandchildren's time when the United States is a service and information economy, where nearly all the key manufacturing industries have slipped away to other countries. When awesome technological powers are in the hands of a very few and no one representing the public interest can even grasp the issues. When people have lost the abilities to set their own agendas or knowledgeably question those in authority. When clutching our crystals and nervously consulting our own horoscopes, our cultural facilities are in decline, and able to distinguish between what feels good and what's true. We slide almost without noticing back into superstition and darkness. The dumbing down of America is most evident in the slow decay of substantive content in the, man, he uses a lot of big words, in the enormously influential media. The 30-second soundbites now down to 10 seconds or less, the lowest common denominator programming, credulous presentations on pseudoscience and superstition, but especially the kind of celebration of ignorance."
That guy was very smart.
Yeah, he's so smart he writes big words that I can't say. But, I mean, essentially, he was just like, he kind of had a vision of kind of the way things are now. We take things in short little sound bites and we run with them, and we run with them as fact.
Yeah.
And we don't go and say, I need to make this my own knowledge.
And that's the thing, like, I think we're all guilty of that. Like, I think that's human nature, right? Like, again, I did it 4 seconds ago. I think that's part of human nature. But I think it's important to recognize when we do that.
Is that because we just as humans have a tendency to be very trusting of each other?
I don't know.
Authority.
Yeah, there's
or
some
what
interesting.
seems to be authority.
There's some interesting studies that talk about that.
I don't know. I'm a guy who's actually against authority.
So there's
having sat in positions of authority.
So one of the most famous, I guess, authority studies was done by a guy named Stanley Milgram. He did, among others, but he did essentially this study, and you've probably heard of it to some extent, where he would bring two people in. One was like the person that was actually being tested, and the other one was like kind of in on the study. We call them Confederates. And so what they would do is they would say that they were randomly assigning you to either the learner or the teacher. It wasn't random, of course. One of the people was in on it. And so they would assign this person you've never met before as the learner. And your job as the teacher, not really knowing what's going on, was to ask this learner questions, and every time they would get the answer wrong, you would give them a shock, like a shock.
Ooh, that would be fun to do in Lodge.
Now again, none of it was real, right? Nobody was actually getting shocked.
Okay.
But like in the room next to you, you could hear the person being like, that hurt. And I think they would even start with like giving you an example of like, what does 15 volts feel like? It's like you would be kind of shocked, like know what that feels like. But that's the interesting thing is that it would start at 15 volts, but as the learner got more questions wrong, it would start going up to 30 and then 45. And at the end of like this kind of switchboard, there was it had like triple X or something like super dangerous.
It was just like an X or whatever.
Yeah,
like bad business.
Yeah, it would say something like that. And the question was with this study, how far would people go on this board, right? And behind this person, they did a lot of variations of this, where some of them I think was just like a phone call or a recording. But the most common one that they cite is that there would be someone in a lab coat that when the person was like, ooh, I don't feel comfortable about shocking someone, the person in the lab coat would say something just like, the study requires that you continue. Or like something like
or
that.
just, please go on with the study.
Well,
not really a lot of pressure, just that person with authority saying, like, oh, please don't stop.
I think they did say something to the effect of, like, the study requires that you continue. But, again, they did a couple variations where, like, originally they did it just with men. They did another study where it was with women. There was no difference. They did a study where it was like, if instead of having an authoritative person, there's just a recording telling you that you have to do this. Like, what does that do, right? But anyways, the most common one where you have the person with the lab coat, it turns out they interviewed a bunch of like psychologists and said like what percentage of people will go all the way, like who would go all the way to the end and like essentially kill this person with shocked. And the psychologist said that only like I think it was like 1% because that's sadistic behavior, and we know that like
that 1% of the population is sadistic.
Is sadistic, yeah.
Oh, great.
And so they said something like that, I can't remember the exact numbers, but it was something like that. It turns out they couldn't have been like more wrong. Like 2/3 of everyone that was in that study went all the way to the end.
Really?
Absolutely.
A lot of people complied with what they were being asked to do.
And don't get me wrong.
Because of authority.
Yeah, they all complained about it. Like, they're good people, right? They would get to, like, they felt the 15-volt shock. They know it's not that big of a deal. So, yeah, we can do 15. Not a big deal. But eventually you kind of get down there and they maybe hear the other person say they have, like, a heart condition or something.
Or start screaming when they get shocked.
Totally. Know? And, like, again, they're good people.
You know, shocked.
And so they turn around to the guy in the lab coat. They're like, oh, I do not feel good about this. Like, this is not okay. Whatever, right? You complain. They would say that it was not good. But the person in the lab coat, this authority figure, would just say, the study requires that you go on. Like, they're going to, like, the person in authority is going to take all the responsibility for it. So you're guilt-free. So people would go all the way. 2/3 went all the way. And again, they did other studies where they would also show... Like, you would see someone before you rebel. You would, like, again, it was somebody that was in on it. But the person before you would say, no, I'm not doing this. This is stupid. And they'd walk out. And if the person before you rebelled, like 99% of people would also rebel. And so it was just, it was a study trying to dial in, like, what does it take for you to be evil? And I think Stanley Milgram, the reason he did this study was because he was actually Jewish. And I think he was trying to figure out, like,
how could these people do those terrible things?
How could these people do these terrible things in, like, the Holocaust? And, like, how do we get to that point? Could a Holocaust or something similar happen here in America? And, of course, people say, no, it wouldn't happen. We're not Nazi Germany. But from his experiment, he shows, like, at least 2/3 of people will literally kill a guy because somebody says do it. Or somebody is an authority figure. So it's interesting because, like, there is this tendency of a human being to go with the crowd, to go with that authority figure. And to be honest with you, I don't even remember what we were talking about when I started talking about Stanley Milgram, but there you go. Do you remember what we were talking about?
Well, it's all flowed, basically.
Right, but I mean, I was thinking maybe it was because of just our human nature is that we trust people first. Most of the time, and so we'll just take what they say as fact.
Oh, that's right. That's where we started.
I think it also speaks to that there is no virtue in weakness. Most people don't have it pre-decided what they will and won't do. They just kind of exist and go through life and do what they're told. And so they're not strong in that sense. And so when it comes time to make that choice or to compromise something, then they will. And so by not being determinedly strong and good, you become weak and bad.
I also think it
which might be like a little bit of like no, actually no, I'll stand by it. Yeah.
I think it also kind of speaks to like it's really easy when you're not in a situation like that to say how you'll respond.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Right.
Which is part of the weakness of like, oh, I wouldn't.
Yeah, I'd take a bullet for that person.
But in the USSR with Stalin and everything, that was called the USSR. Anyway, it doesn't matter. 1 out of 3 people were Soviet informants. So if you had a mom and dad and like 5 kids, odds are at least one of those people are going to turn in their own family for something they do and get them hauled off to the gulag or something, and it goes along with that.
There's a lot of studies that you can, well, not a lot, because a lot of them are super unethical, but like there are some other studies that like speak to this like willingness to follow authority. So like there's another guy, I can't remember his first name, Philip Zimbardo, I think it is. He did the Stanford prison experiment.
Oh, that's where.
And there's like some methodological issues with his study, but that was essentially kind of a similar thing where he got random kids from the college that he specifically picked because they had good like mental fortitude or whatever. I can't remember how he describes it, but they were mentally healthy, and he picked them because they're normal and like there shouldn't be any issues. And then he randomly divided them into 2 groups: the prisoners and the guards. And he was the warden, which is kind of not great for a study. Like you don't want to be that directly involved, but whatever. And sure enough, like the prisoners were like the subjects of like abuse and like. They would strip them naked and like make them clean out the toilet bowls with like their hands or stuff. Like the guards would do this. And again, it came down to this thing of like you have a warden that's the authority figure that like takes all the blame, quote unquote. And so like they kind of like it's the thought being like this releases your inner demons. Now again, the prison experiment kind of has some issues with its methods, but. There's like Robbers Cove or something, I think is another one where they did it with kids.
I've heard of that one.
Where I think they did something again.
But they kind of proved with that one though that it took a lot of pushing from the adults in charge to get the kids.
Well, no,
because even though there was a rivalry between them, they celebrated one kid's birthday in one of the camps, and the kid asked, "Can we invite the other team?" Even though they'd already established the rivalry and stuff, so the adults actually had to push. And then once they had been pushed, it was established, and the kids did some things themselves. But the kids wanted to compete, but not be mean.
I can't remember. I don't remember the study that well, because I just remember the kids calling the other kids communists and, like, all sorts of stuff. And, like, obviously they were just random kids. Like, they weren't anything. And then I remember that, like, they planned the study to go for, like, 2 weeks or something, but the kids were getting so intense with each other that, like, they had to cut it short. And then, but what was interesting though about that one, and the point I wanted to really talk about is like the flow can go the other way too. Is like because I think at Robbers Cove what they did is then they started doing like tasks that like they had to work together on to like make progress. Like I think like the bus broke down and like they had to work together.
And something with like their water.
Yeah, and so like they had to work together to like make anything, and like. That resolved a lot of the issues. Like, they went from, like, hating each other to, like, being able to work with each other and, like, being tolerant of each other. And I think that's the point, right? Like, depending on who our authority figures are, we can absolutely engineer a human race that, like, hates each other and is horrible to each other. But we can also engineer a human race that, like, is tolerant of each other, that cares for each other. Because, again, this phenomenon of the authority figure... being able to quite literally control other people's behaviors, that's not pretend, that's not fake, right? Like, that's very real. And so so if we put people in authority that take us to worse places, we can't really be surprised when people act worse, right? Of course they are. We know that's what's going to happen. So what we need to work on is putting people in authority that will take us to better places. Now, that doesn't mean that's easy or even that it's possible, but, like, it also does kind of explain... Like, there's a reason that we're hyper-polarized these days, right? Like, on one side or the other.
'Cause the people in charge are.
Well, and that benefits their cause, right?
Mm-hmm.
If they can get a bunch of very, very, regardless of where you lean, where you stand, if you can get a lot of people that devoutly support you, that is only beneficial to you. So of course that's what they do. Like, we shouldn't be surprised by that. And that's what the system, like, allows them to do. So I don't know, there's no point to this. There's no, like, grand philosophical end of, like, here's how we solve things. It's just, like, you look at this stuff, like, you look at what Carl Sagan says, and it's like, wow, how awesome he was for predicting, like, this is what the world would kind of look like. But also, like, yeah, of course that's what it's going to look like. Of course it is, because we know these things about human nature, and why wouldn't we be at this point? Like, it's not surprising.
Right.
Oh, man, I've made myself sad.
But how do you? I mean, you take some of these cases back to your lodge structure. We vote in somebody every year to that we say is in charge for that year, that Masonic year, and we don't outright say it, but we in the back of our heads we all think it, that we are subject to his decisions for a year.
Gary,
when it comes
off,
to Masonically.
Thank you for bringing this to Masons, because I didn't know how to end that, and that's awesome. That was perfect. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
But I mean, I think it's interesting. I mean, you can learn from those social studies, and you can go, well, how can I take this back to lodge? How can I make it a better place? Because we have a hierarchy. There's a group of people there, and if the master does things this way, the year isn't going to be is going to be a good one, and things will go well. Or you're going to divide your lodge and have two groups against each other. It could be the membership against the master, or half the lodge against the other half of the lodge, or it could be a year where everybody pulls together and just rocks the tar out of things. And it'd be curious to find out what, like in that study, especially with those kids, what it was that brought them together. And if there were other studies like that, what was the thing that brought them together? Maybe you take it back and maybe even look at military groups and firefighters and police officers that fight in the trenches with each other in extreme conditions, and for some reason they gain a brotherhood and an almost unbreakable bond of loyalty because of the experiences that they've had together, that they will not do anything to offend that brother.
So that's what I would say is, I want to highlight 2 points from what you just said, because I really, really like it. Because I was feeling really down. I was like, oh man, yeah, everything's screwed, everything's ruined, there's no point in trying to do anything, because, like, of course we can't change. But, like, you can have an impact on your local environment, and that's what Masonry is all about, is change your community. Like, do I need to figure out how to change the country? No, because I can change my community. I can have a positive impact right here, right now. And one of the easiest ways to do that is absolutely like you're saying, like through lodge. We're coming up on elections in November, and like we can absolutely we could put whoever the heck we want into that position, but if we choose someone that's going to be the authority that leads us down a darker path, quote, I mean, I'm just making up words now, but like, right. if we take that person because we feel pressured, or because we want to, or because that's just tradition, or whatever, then like, we can't be surprised when the next year doesn't go well. But if we put who we actually think will bring the lodge together and like build that camaraderie, build that trust in each other, then that's who we should elect, almost regardless of who they are, because that's what will help. That's what makes a lodge year good. The second thing I wanted to highlight is, you talked about a lot, is that shared experience. And I think that's why Masons can meet on the level, not all the time, right? We always have the one that decides they are better than everybody and they don't care about meeting on the level. But like, I think that's why we can, is because that's why Masonry is useful. It's a shared experience. We all went through the same degrees. We all went through the same like learning process. We all went through these same things that honestly, some parts of it sucked because you have to memorize and you have to like learn, and who the heck likes that? But because we all have this shared almost suffering, right? It's probably like the lowest level of suffering you can because you're memorizing something. But like, because we all have this shared experience, we have something in common. We have something that we can always fall back on as a level of trust, right? That's why Masonry is valuable. Not because it's just a bunch of random dudes hanging out, but because it's a bunch of random dudes that have a shared experience. That it doesn't matter where you come from, we all have the shared experience. And I think that's how you fight the lack of tolerance. I think that's how you fight hyperpolarization, racism, sexism, is you get, if you're feeling racist tendencies, like start hanging out with people of whatever race you feel that towards, right? Build that camaraderie with them, and you'll be less racist because of what you're talking about. Because of, you have firefighters that share these life-threatening situations. It doesn't matter where you come from. You have to trust each other. And so like that, even if you're racist going in, right, you can come out of that not being racist or less racist. Right. And so I think it's that shared experience. It's that shared, honestly, I'm going to say suffering. Like, if you go through crap with someone, you two are thicker than blood, right? Like, that's what binds you together.
I think you're exactly right. That it's the shared experiences. It's the commonality of that shared experience that creates the bond that you can always fall back to.
And I'll add into that, it's also the shared principles. Mm-hmm. Like you both, it's not only the shared experience, but the same, not necessarily beliefs. No, because beliefs are, a true belief is something you act out. And to a certain degree, we all have the same beliefs to go along with that experience. And some of the beliefs and the experience are part of the same experience. So that makes it even, that's an important part that can't be left out, I think.
Right. But we do have some Masons that'll go through the degrees that don't have the commitment to the oaths that they take, or at least at the time they take them. Mm-hmm. They might happen later.
But I think that's okay too. I don't think you can get everybody. You know what I mean? Like, I think you're going to always have a percentage, whatever that is, that don't give a crap and are just doing it for funsies.
To become part of the Illuminati and rule the world.
Yeah, exactly. And like, who doesn't want that? Everybody does. I want to rule the world. I would do a poor job of it, but I would want to do it still. I don't know why.
The less I can be in charge of, the better. That's for sure. That's why.
I don't know. There's nothing. I mean, this is a whole topic for another day. But I think leadership positions are good for people to have.
I agree.
Oh yeah.
I think,
and that's one of the beauties of masonry is going through the chairs and having responsibility is not a bad thing. And I've watched it happen. Well, yeah. I've watched it happen in the scouting program with young men as old as 9 years old take on responsibility and do a fantastic job with it. And it changes them.
Totally.
And when I say the less things to be in charge of, the better, I don't mean, I think if one is given the opportunity, like if you're elected to sit in a chair, you should say yes. You shouldn't say, oh no, I don't want that. But you shouldn't seek it.
Right.
Like, yes, do it when the task is assigned you. But if you're seeking it, that's
another beauty of the craft that I think I like is that you're chosen by your brothers. You don't electioneer. You don't. I'm glad that rule's in there, but
no campaign.
You're chosen because of the needs of the lodge, not because of you want to be president for the day.
And because there's 7 chairs, only 7 brothers show up, so you have no choice.
Yes.
Sometimes
you're sitting somewhere, buddy.
Sitting somewhere, yeah.
But I think that would be an excellent place to cut this off at, actually.
I think it was a very, I think when we go for it, we do a really good job of,
it turns out
natural conclusion point. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because, this is a good conclusion. We've been all over the place for sure, but we wrapped it up nicely. Solid 30 minutes. It was good.
Yeah.
And I love the social stuff is intriguing to me. I mean, I hated that class in college. It was my required sociology class, but afterwards I've appreciated it so much more. That's the stuff I would just want to go back and I want to read that case study. I want to read that,
Because now you have a reason to care about it.
Yeah.
You gotta be careful, because, people always claim their stuff is more meaningful. Like the prison experiment. People still, to this day, cite that as, a conclusive study on, the evil of man. And, there is so much wrong with how he did that study. It's not very scientific. He encouraged the guards to be jerks because in the beginning they weren't being jerks. And so he like kind of encouraged them. That's not a good experiment.
No.
That's not a good
Exactly.
study.
But when you've been fun to prove a point, you'll try to.
You try to prove a point, exactly.
And now we're starting to do a podcast again. We should
The other
this up.
the other side of the coin
It's
is
time to
anytime humans are involved,
It's biased, yeah.
it's going to be biased, and it's never going to have the perfect outcome, especially when there's gray matter involved. But that's been our podcast.
Yes.
Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
We've enjoyed our time together here today. Thanks to Brother AC and Brother Jason for your expertise and your thoughts today. It's been a good discussion.
But we are on YouTube and any podcast platform, at least basically any podcast.
Yeah, pretty much
platform.
everything. Even Alexa now.
We even have a website.
Alexa has a podcast?
You can
play
ask
podcasts.
her to play
or-
podcasts, but
yeah.
you have to be on to.
Oh, I thought you meant my friend. Oh,
No.
Oh.
She's a good podcaster too.
No, she is not a good podcaster.
Oh, okay.
She has a potty mouth. That's all I'm saying.
Some podcasts do.
Yeah.
But we
We
also
don't.
have a website, which is, what's it called again?
From the North, podcast.com.
Podcast.com. You can get into contact with us or see more of our things.
We need to do more
If
with
you
I need to
wanted.
give you an email still. My Proton mail.
Yeah,
Yes.
give me your Proton Mail when you
I
get
don't
that.
have one. If somebody just wants to make one,
When you get one. You have to put in your own key, so
fine, whatever.
you're going to have to type in every single
Worth it,
time. But it's encrypted.
Alright.
though. Anyways, thanks for listening.
The host of the From the North podcast are providing this podcast as a public service and for their own selfish motives. It is neither a legal interpretation nor a statement of any Grand Lodge, local lodge, or any Masonic body, or Freemasonry in general. Any reference to any specific product, subject, or entity does not constitute an endorsement or a recommendation. The rantings, tomfoolery, and views expressed by the guests and the hosts are their own, and their appearance on the program does not apply any endorsement of them, any Grand or local lodge, or any entity they represent.